open the new series. That's to say the first conference this year, this civil year, in our series Leuven Colloquia on Ancient Platonism. And it's a great joy and pleasure and honor for me to announce someone from a nearby university, from the University of Liège, Professor Marc-Antoine Gavray. We have known Marc-Antoine for a very long time, and people will know his publications. He has published on Simplicius, on Damascus, on all kinds of things, commentaries on the Phaedo. Marc-Antoine is also president of the Société Belge de Philosophie, and one of the promoters or directors of the Lille Bru initiative, which is a collaboration between the University of Lille, Bruxelles, ULB, and Liège, of course, his home university. And today he will talk on one of his favorite topics, Simplicius, but a specific thing. The title is Why Rescue Parmenides on Zeno's Ontology in Simplicius. So please, Marc-Antoine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me. Actually, I realized 2 hours ago that it was I gave here my first talk, and it was in late 2002. So it was at the middle of my life. Let's consider that I'm at the end of my life. So, well, so I hope you will not die by being bored by my paper, but let's try to do something interesting. So let's start. Plato's mise-en-scène in the Parmenides creates one of the more peculiar situations in the history of philosophy. One gifted mind, Zeno, rescues another, Parmenides, by corroborating his thesis. He does not formulate a theory of his own, but confirms that of his predecessor, that is, being is one, through subtler arguments. We are free to believe in the Platonic narrative, but in the eyes of the later Platonists, Plato's authority left no doubt in this regard. They afforded Zeno the special status of an auxiliary figure. Did they, however, see Zeno as a minor philosopher who made no real contribution to the Eleatic position? So that will be the question I want to raise today. So this paper is anchored in Simplicius, whose commentary on the physics is our only source for many of the Eleatic arguments. But if Zeno had remained a secondary figure in his eyes, why would he have taken the trouble to quote and discuss his arguments, as he does those of Melissus and Parmenides, especially when Aristotle's text does not explicitly require it? This is what I want to examine in the following minutes. Well, following, hour in singular. So let's start with Zeno as a matter of dispute. In Simplicius, the philosophers before Plato are part of a historical schema in which each one fulfills a specific function within his system, or the Neoplatonic system. Those who deal with the first and intelligible principle occupy 3 successive ranks whose historical order mirrors the order of procession. So we have Xenophanes speaking of the one, Parmenides speaking of the one being, or the being one, the intelligible, and Melissus speaking of the life at this level. As we see, Zeno is absent from this taxonomy, as is from the history of principle in physics, Aristotle's Physics 1, chapter 2-3, where his name does not appear among the partisans of the unity of being. Simplicius thus appears to treat Zeno as having an essential role in neither the construction of Eleatic ontology nor the elucidation of the relationship between being and one, according to the architecture of later Neoplatonic metaphysics. However, Simplicius does not confine Zeno to physical aporias about need to be in one place or the impossibility of movement later discussed in the commentary. It is regarding an ontological question that he introduces Zeno by way of a quotation from the peripatetic commentators he diligently follows. In other words, Eudemus and Alexander impose perspective on him, and his efforts concentrate on saving Zeno from an inaccurate exegesis. Here is his starting point, and this is your text number 1. After quoting the passage we have to explain, Alexander adds, either Aristotle divided ways according to which each thing is both one and multiple, or showing that one is not said univocally. He speaks of how Zeno showed that each sensible is many, a thesis by which one could be troubled. For either beings are many in definitions, but one in subject. For example, the musical Socrates and the white Socrates are many in definition. Also, Socrates is one in subject. All the same is both one and many, as are the whole and the parts. One as a whole, many as made of parts, since the part is not shown as identical to the whole. The reference remains vague and seems to point towards to the Parmenides, 129 CD, more than to the famous treatise of Zeno, which Alexander does not seem to have had at his disposal. It at least allows Simplicius to open a discussion that will end some 50 pages later. We will see this passage later. He immediately invokes Eudemus, who was probably the first to identify the eleatic as the source of disturbing arguments that Aristotle evokes in the Physics. So this is the text number 2, if I'm not wrong. Perhaps it is in no way worse to also quote Eudemus in the perspective of giving greater attention to what is said. Here is the text that follows the answer on the meaning of the one. Therefore, on the one hand, it is not one. On the other, is there anything one? That was indeed in question. Zeno, it is said, asserted that if one exposed to him what one is, he could also say what the beings are. He was in doubt, as it seems, because each sensible is said to be many by attribution and by partition, and to pose that the point is nothing. For what does not increase by addition nor diminish by subtraction, he considered that it does not belong to beings. These quotations pose several problems for Simplicius. First, they associate Zeno with the troubling arguments about one and many to which Aristotle refers at Physic 1.2, 185b, 25-27. If Eudemus expresses some reservation regarding this attribution, so you have the fasi, os, ehoke, Alexander has not such forms. However, the two commentators do not put Zeno in the same position. For Alexander, Zeno is at the origin of these troubling arguments, while for Eudemus, Zeno himself fell prey to them. Secondly, these quotations attribute to Zeno the idea that there is a close relationship between the being and the one, according to which one would not exist without the other. Thirdly, they link Zeno to the argument from the point which implies a spatialization of being. That is, there belongs to beings only that which increases or decreases by its presence or absence. And the point does not have any magnitude, therefore the point does not exist. And finally, they associate him with attribution and partition, or predication and partition, ideas which the commentators will use to do what Zeno apparently could not, and so the aporia of the plurality of the one. To restore what appears to him to be the correct interpretation, as opposed to that of the peripatetics, Simplicius will not only situate Zeno with regard to the aporia, this aporia, but he will also determine at what level of reality being and one belongs according to him. So what's Zeno's role in the Neoplatonic the late Neoplatonic ontology. So let's go back to Aristotle's lemma, at least the way Simplicius reads it. So the two quotes appear in connection with Physics 1.2, 185b25 and 186a3. In this lemma, Aristotle evokes a difficulty that has troubled his recent predecessors, namely that the same thing is both one and many. He names lycophron, whose solution consists in suppressing the copula because of the probability that the utterance, logos, or the division, diathesis, produce in the one. Since Simplicius' commentary on this passage passes through several different moments, it would be useful to lay out the movement he follows in his interpretation of Zeno. So that's why I gave you as T3 let's say a landscape, let's say a landscape of this lemma. I won't read it extensively, and I will go immediately to the conclusion. So as we can see from this lemma, Zeno is not at the heart of Simplicius' concerns, but is above all an object of exegetical dispute amongst Aristotle's commentators and peripatetic commentators more exactly. So let's move to Eudemus' position. And then it will be Alexander's position and then Simplicius' position. In order to take advantage of their opponent, the two peripatetics project their own concepts onto Zeno. Here is how Eudemus proceeds. So this is T4. Yeah. Moreover, if one were to add the remaining categories, one would build a more convincing argument. For the point obviously produces neither substance nor quality nor anything existing according to the division. Now, if the point is such, if each of us is said to be many, for example, white musical, and all the rest as well as the stones, since the communion of each is infinite, how could the one exist? So Eudemus distinguishes two arguments, the unreality of the point and the plurality drawn from the definition. The first comes from the metaphysics, where Aristotle mentions Zeno's axiom, according to which there is nothing which, added or removed, makes neither greater nor smaller. Because what is a magnitude, megatos, and if it is a magnitude, it is corporeal, somaticon. So magnitude would be the right criterion of reality. Only bodies would exist, while the one or the point would be nothing. So Eudemus' interpretation goes a step further since it extends the argument to the other categories, what is said according to the divisions. So then the second argument draws from our lemma. Eudemus' strategy this time around is to compare the fragmentation of a stone to the plurality obtained by definition, and to consider that predication, in a sense, divides a substance into properties. Just as a stone can chatter in one infinite number of ways, enunciating the properties of a substance in a virtually infinite process, reveal its plurality, so Socrates is white, musical, etc. So Eudemus' exegetical quotient shows that he has no direct access to the text of Zeno. Comparing two passages from Aristotle, he gives a reading of Zeno firmly rooted in physics, the level of corporeality, and attributes to him the removal of the one, both as a constitutive element of magnitude and as a mode of totality. Therefore, to get out of this aporia, he opposed to Zeno's aporia the couple of potentiality and actuality, which is also at work in the physical realm, and restore the one at the same time as the being. And this is your text number 5. So if Zeno were present to us, we would tell him about the actual one that is not many. Unity belongs to him properly, plurality according to potentiality. Thus, the same is both one and many, but only one of them actually, never both together. If we succeed in persuading him with these arguments, we would think that we have fulfilled our commitment. So let's move to Simplicius en soi and the discussion with Alexander. The refutation of the peripatetic reading of Zeno is carried out over the course of Simplicius' exegesis of Aristotle's text. With text in hand, so compared to Eudemus, Simplicius seems to have the Zeno's text at his disposal. Simplicius successively refutes Eudemus as read by Alexander, and Alexander himself. His response to the peripatetics as a twofold aim, at once hermeneutic and doctrinal. He wishes to craft an interpretation of Zeno in accord not only with the extant sources, but also with what he understands to be the teachings of Parmenides, which Zeno is supposed to defend. First, against Eudemus, Simplicius emphasizes that the argument he attributes to Zeno is found neither in Zeno's book nor in the Parmenides. This amounts to a rejection of Eudemus' reading insofar as it finds no support either in the letters of Zeno's text or in Plato's authority, so that is in Plato's Parmenides. Commenting on the previous citation, Simplicius writes, and this is your text number 6, in this passage, Zeno's argument is obviously different from that reported in his book, which Plato also mentions in the Parmenides. There, indeed, flying to the rescue of Parmenides, who asserts that being is one, Zeno shows that it is not many. Here, however, Eudemus claims he denies even the one because he speaks of the point as the one, while he admits the existence of the many. Then, contra Alexander's reading of Eudemus, Simplicius finds that Eudemus reasoning is based on the multiplication of the one. Finally, against Alexander, he objects that Zeno's book contains no argument suppressing both the one and the many, which at the same time removes any attempt to reduce Zeno's work to a simple adjective job. In doing so, Simplicius neutralizes the peripatetic readings and makes an alternative reading possible, which takes the aporia out of physics. And the end of the lemma thus distinguishes 3 levels of solving the aporia related respectively to 3 authoritative texts. The first solution concerned the relationships between the forms and comes from the sophist. The inclusion of Plato's amongst the last of the elders in the Eudemus quote catches Simplicius' eye, and it recalls that Plato settled the aporia of predication by means of the mutual participation of the forms. This solution, Simplicius notes, is precisely that of Parmenides. And in doing so, he presents the possibility of a solution that goes beyond physics and connects the Eleatic and Platonic positions through an aporia originally raised by Zeno. His second solution concerns the relationship as sensible to the forms and comes from the Parmenides this time. Simplicius cites Parmenides 129 C4 to E3, where Socrates explained that every sensible participates in the models of the one and the many. This dialogue confirms that it is Zeno who pushes us towards the solution to the aporia and who articulates the two models of participation. In a way, Zeno plays the role of an intermediary who leads us to Parmenides' one being and Plato's intelligibles. Finally, the third solution concerns the relations of attributes to substance and is derived from Aristotle's lemma as commented on by Porphyry. As a subject, substance guarantees the unity of the whole, whereas accidents produce a plurality which is not affected, no more than do the genus and species because they are posterior to the individual. So if none of the preceding solution rests directly on Zeno, he is nevertheless responsible for Plato's and Aristotle's answer. It is therefore difficult to locate him in Simplicius' system. It is obvious, however, that by helping Parmenides, his role is less that of offering a direct solution than that of leading others, Plato and Aristotle first and foremost, towards solutions in agreement with Eleatic ontology, that is, with the one being of the Neoplatonic system. From this point of view, he is not directly responsible for the definition of being, but serves as a guide on the path towards formulating it. I will do a small remark about Simplicius' relation to the solution of his contemporaries and basically Asclepius, because Simplicius' solution reflects a shared reading, obviously, within the school of Ammonius, at least as attested by Asclepius' commentary on the 11th aporia of Metaphysics Beta. So I won't enter into detail about Asclepius' text. It is already complicated as it is. So if Zeno plays a role in ontology, it is indirectly through the conversion of his readers. That's how a Neoplatonist of the Alexandrian school seems to consider him. So let's move to another matter of dispute about Zeno. Simplicius' second mention of Zeno in an ontological context. I should say that I won't talk about Zeno's aporia, about movement in later in the commentary. So sorry if you were expecting that, but it will be for the next lecture. So no, I won't do that. So again, he intervenes in a debate within the peripatetics about the twofold aporia mentioned by Aristotle, in which Parmenides, Plato, in the Parmenides and Sophists, Xenocrates, Themisius, Eudemus, Alexander, and Porphyry all feature. So it is quite long a lemma, and you will find, let's say, once again, landscape in page 5 and 6 of your handout. I won't read it extensively, but I want to start with texts number 7, which is Aristotle's statement. So some thinkers, in point of fact, made concessions to both arguments. To the arguments that all things are one if being means one thing, they conceded that what is not is. That what is not is, sorry. To that from dichotomy, they yielded by positing indivisible magnitudes. So according to Simplicius, these two arguments refer respectively to Parmenides and Zeno, who wanted, text number 8, so that is Zeno, who wanted to come to the rescue of Parmenides' account against those who try to mock it by claiming that if it is one, many absurdities and self-contradiction result from that argument, since Zeno shows how their hypothesis, if it is many, would, if someone examined the matter thoroughly, suffer consequences even more absurd than those suffered by the hypothesis of its being one. So for Zeno himself, in the Parmenides, is clearly a witness with his account. As for Parmenides' account, he says that the one being is all things, since being means one. So Simplicius brandishes the Parmenides to justify his interpretations of Zeno, insofar as he proclaims a doctrinal agreement between the master and his disciple that will allow him to overcome the interpretations of the Peripatetics, Alexander and Eudemus. His strategy is first of all exegetical, emphasizing the distance between of these interpreters, and the sources, not only Plato, but Aristotle as well. So Alexander attributes the dichotomy to Zeno and judges that it suppresses the one, according to a reading which again takes up the model of corporeal fragmentation and confines being to physics. If all beings have a magnitude, the one is excluded because division makes it infinitely many and without magnitude. However, the authority of the Parmenides and the physics allows Simplicius to challenge Alexander's construal of Zeno's intention. Simplicius aims to restore Zeno's agreement with Parmenides. If the two Eleatics have the same goal, Zeno indirectly reaches it by dialectical argument, epikeiremata, aiming to destroy the many. That is to say, aiming to prove per impossibile the necessity of going beyond the many and beyond physics. This nod to the Parmenides makes it possible to emphasize, contra Alexander, that the one is neither plurality nor magnitude nor anything divisible, but that it is merely all things. The physics provides a second argument. If the dichotomy were to bring about plurality, it would manifestly conflict with Parmenides' logos, which is why Aristotle would have no reason to associate them. From Simplicius' point of view, Alexander's error is therefore a departure from the dual authority of Plato and Aristotle regarding Zeno's project. As for Eudemus, from whom Simplicius takes up the passage quoted above, he appears only as a possible source of Alexander's idea that Zeno would annihilate the one. Simplicius does not go further, since he has already shown the error of this reading. Instead, he questions the status and function of Zeno's argument. So let's move to Zeno's arguments. Which is not the most easy piece of ancient philosophy. The discussion with the Peripatetics shows that Simplicius attributes dialectical reasoning to Zeno. His arguments are neither logoi, let's say accounts, that the physics says about the dichotomy, nor aporiae, as discussed above, but epikeiremata, dialectical syllogism. So, according to Simplicius, since Zeno's arguments are intended to refute the thesis of the existence of plurality completely, they are dialectical. Now, the idea that Zeno would advance dialectical arguments does not come from Aristotle or his commentators. Simplicius likely takes his inspiration from the Parmenides. Firstly, the verb epikeirein is used by Zeno about the contradictors of Parmenides who set about deriding him. Secondly, Socrates uses it to designate the aporias on the one and the many which apply to the sensible. If the use seems different, insofar as the technical sense likely only appears with Aristotle, Simplicius could nevertheless seize upon an echo of this dialectical vocabulary in Plato to determine the status of Zeno's arguments. When he argues, it is to defeat a thesis contrary to that of his master, and it does not simply content himself with attacking the evidence, but makes a universal refutation that demonstrates the thesis' invalidity. So the purpose that Simplicius attributes to Zeno's argument confirm these points. And this is text number 8. No, 9. We won't go back to the text number 8. It's likely with the idea of practicing to argue on both sides, which is why he is called double-tongued, and to raise difficulties that Zeno makes such arguments about one. In his treatise, which contains many dialectical arguments, he shows by each one that the man who says that beings are many exposes himself to contradictions. This passage involves at least 3 difficulties. First of all, Simplicius attributes to Zeno's dialectic arguments the function of an exercise or exercises. But for what are they exercising, and how do they do so? The adverb gymnastikos is rare in Simplicius. The only other instance precisely qualified the mode of argumentation used by Zeno in the infinite dichotomy. Well, actually, I will talk about the infinite dichotomy, but it's already over. So, as for 2 occurrences of the related adjective, they confirm that far from being an end in itself, the exercise aims to prepare us for something. Yet, for what, in Simplicius' eyes, do Zeno's exercises prepare us? To argue or to defend a thesis? A clue emerges with the second difficulty. The fact that for each argument, the end is to annihilate the thesis supporting the existence of plurality confers unity on Zeno's book. To refute the existence of plurality. In this sense, his arguments do not only train to argumentation, but they argue against a given thesis with the idea that its opposite is valid. Which leads to the last difficulty. Why does Simplicius speak of arguments on both sides if they all aim to refute the same thesis? Here, it refers lest 2 contradictory, being is one and being is not one, or opposite thesis, being is one and beings are many, then to 2 contradictory conclusions taken from the same thesis. That is, plurality is limited and plurality is not limited, to show the truth of its reverse. That is, being is one instead of being is many. So Zeno prepares us for Parmenides to the extent that he trains us to conclude the necessary truths of his master's thesis, right, refuting the contrary firmly and definitely. In a way, he embodies the dialectical side of Eleatism, which rejects any opposition to its thesis and on the unity of being. So let us now examine how the arguments that Simplicius attributes to Zeno contribute to Parmenides' thesis. So, and we will read the 3 quotes of Zeno's argument. Let's try with the first quote. So Zeno wrote a treatise containing 40 arguments, according to Proclus, to refute the theory that being is many and to prove, on the contrary, that it is one. Now, as our main witnesses all are Neoplatonists, and as 9 centuries separate them from their source, we have every reason to remain cautious about the supposed number and end of these arguments, as well as to the idea that they all come from a single treatise. At least, it is likely that Simplicius quotes 3 excerpts from the same text, the one available to Proclus and Elias, who attribute the arguments to Zeno. The rest, let's say, is dubious. Simplicius' first shows, according to him, that plurality implies that beings are both infinitely large and so small as to be devoid of magnitude. However, he adds, according to Zeno, what is dimensionless is nothing. This is text number 9. Yeah. No. 10. For Zeno says, if it were added to another being, it would not make it any larger. Indeed, since its magnitude is nothing, it is not capable of contributing to the magnitude of what it is added to. It follows that what is added would be nothing. And if, when it is removed, the other thing is not less, and conversely, when it is added, it does not increase what it is added to, it is clear that what is added is nothing, nor what is removed. Simplicius truncates the quotation and focuses on the elements related to the extract of Eudemus, that is, the part relating to the smallness and the composition of the plurality, neglecting the reasons why plurality would lead to infinite size. According to him, the argument is based on a process of infinite division that does not lead to the removal of the one, as the Peripatetics claim, but instead shows that the division of the many entities made up of several elements ultimately leads to entities so small that they are without size. Now, it recalls Zeno has already shown that if each constituent element of the many is one and identical to itself, it no longer has magnitude, since these properties imply its indivisibility, where division supposes plurality and possession of parts. The arguments thus lead to a contradiction between two premises. On the one hand, every element of the many has magnitude, otherwise it could not generate their plurality. On the other hand, none has magnitude because of the process of division that it undergoes since it is many. It is therefore the very possibility of plurality that is put in doubt, insofar as its elements no longer satisfy the conditions of existence that enable them to compose this plurality. Thesis of unity, on the other hand, is saved. But why does Simplicius made it a point of honor to restore the original intention of Zeno's arguments and the paternity of the dichotomy? Also, he bases his demonstration on textual evidence. His project is primarily systematic. If it is not possible in his eyes that Zeno argues in favor of a thesis, or that of Parmenides, and if it is no more possible that Parmenides invented the dichotomy, it is for a crucial reason. Among the Eleatics, Zeno assumed the role of a dialectician whose sole function is to destroy this thesis opposed to that of Parmenides. The latter, on the other hand, embodies the solemnity of his principle. He will never lower himself to refute the partisans of plurality because his discourse works on a higher level. In other words, if Zeno has knowledge of the Eleatic thesis and has the role of leading to it, he approaches it only from the angle of plurality to show the need to rise beyond. The two following quotation confirms Simplicius' reading. So let's move to Zeno's second quote, and I'm almost over, if it can reassure you. So, according to Simplicius, the second quotation provides textual confirmation for the attribution of the dichotomy to Zeno. It rests on a numerical multiplicity and implicitly implements an infinite division where between every two beings, a third one always slips. Text number 12, no, 11. If beings are many, it is necessary that they be as many as they are, neither more nor less than themselves. And if there are as many as they are, they will be limited. And if there are many, beings are unlimited, because there are always beings in between, and still others between them. And in this way, beings are unlimited. So Simplicius quotes this LCAP for the sole purpose of corroborating the attribution to Zeno of a position mirroring that of Parmenides, without aiming at any further explanation. It shows the impossibility of supporting the plurality of beings because it results in a contradiction, thereby showing the implicit necessity of admitting the unity of being. And let's move already to the third quote. The last quote relies, according to Simplicius, on the infinites according to the magnitude. It works in the same way as the previous one, and this one is text number 12. After having shown that if being had no magnitude, it will also not exist, he adds, but if it is, each will necessarily have some magnitude and thickness, and for the one to be external to the other. And the same reasoning applies to what projects. It will have a magnitude, and something within will project indeed. It is the same to utter this once, and to repeat it always, because none of this will be lost, nor will be related to another. Thus, if beings are many, they will necessarily be both large and small, so small that they have no magnitude, so large as to be infinite. Again, Simplicius does not try to explain this third quote. All he seeks is to confirm Zeno's paternity with regard to the dichotomy and his intention not to annihilate the one. From this argument, it appears that Zeno is refuting the thesis of plurality by confusing it with contradictions, that is, being both large and small, limited and unlimited, and so on, which has the indirect effect of reinforcing Parmenides' thesis, which states that being is one. So no need, according to Simplicius, for more analysis, since the agreement between the two Eleatics is restored, where everyone finds his right place. Simplicius can then resume the explanation of Aristotle's lemma and discuss the concessions made to the dichotomy. But Simplicius has his own solution, and he will devote the rest of his exegesis of this lemma and to the second argument, which affirms the unity of being. He seeks in particular to define the status of the Parmenidean being and brings out several possible paths we might take to do so. It is not of a bodily, somaticon nature, for even the heavens, the most perfect natural reality, is not indivisible, unlike being. Nor is it of a psychic nature, because the soul is mobile, whereas being is altogether and identical to itself, both according to the actuality, the potentiality, and the substance. Nor is it of an intellective nature, because it precedes the distinction between the forms and leaves no place for not being, since it is at the same time knowing, that is thinking, noiton, intelligible, and nous, intellect. And finally, it is not a common property, koinotes, in the sense of post-rem concept drawn from abstraction or of a property in things, because they are the result of sensation and opinion. So this is your text now 13. Therefore, it remains that the intelligible be the cause of all things, by which there is thinking and intellect, in which all things are already contained according to one union in a contracted and unified way. This is the Parmenidean one being, in which there is one nature, both of the one and the being. Hence, Zeno also said that if anyone could show him the one, he could give being, not in the sense that it departs from the one, but in the sense that it coexists with, by nature with being. Furthermore, all the preceding conclusions agree with this one being. So, nearly 50 pages later, Simplicius finally gives his reading of the words Eudemus attributes to Zeno. So, that was the beginning of the paper, if you were not, or are not asleep. So, these detours were necessary in order to understand the peripatetics, objections, and interpretations. They also led Zeno back to his proper level, the level of the first principles of the system instead of the level of nature. Zeno's arguments intend to show that the true one, that of Parmenides, is beyond plurality, nature, and distinction. This is the right perspective for reading Zeno, not to associate its arguments with any residual unity, the necessary terminus of the division of complex and multiple natural realities, but with the only true one, that which makes possible the knowledge and the existence of all things. Since they lead any hypothesis positing the plurality, the division, and the distinction of beings to contradiction, they amount to the necessary connection between being and one. And this level, concludes Simplicius, the one to which Zeno truly belongs, corresponds to the summit of theology, far from the domain of physics. So I was supposed to talk about nature and physics, but I'm sorry. It was only to say that it's not physics. So let's move to the conclusion. To return to our initial question, how should one understand Zeno's attempt to rescue Parmenides? In his commentary on the Parmenides, Proclus deploys an allegorical reading or interpretation according to which Zeno embodies the participated intellect and life, Parmenides embodies the unparticipated and divine intellect, the one being, and Socrates embodies the intellect proper. Zeno thus occupies the place reserved for Melissus, the other pupil of Parmenides, in the system described by Simplicius. So that's what I said in the beginning of this paper. However, Proclus' reading stands out on 3 points. First of all, Proclus identifies each character with a divine class, whereas Simplicius attributes to each a discourse on a divine class. Rather than interpreting the history of philosophy, Proclus elaborates an allegory of its metaphysical system. He then insists on Zeno's intermediary position between Socrates and Parmenides, and he attributes to him the function of motivating by his arguments the conversion of the former to the later, from the intellect to its object. And finally, it recognizes that Zeno uses a lower form of dialectic than Parmenides, since it involves an inferior faculty, intellection for one and reason for the other. In this schema, if Zeno rescues Parmenides, it is because Parmenides, as being a perfection, already contains in himself the means of deploying the science that intelligizes him, which is embodied by Zeno. In other words, the disciple is already contained in the master, and his help is simply commended as procession is by conversion. But in Simplicius, things take a more historical turn. Against the peripatetics, it works to restore the link between Zeno and Parmenides, emphasizing their friendship and the proximity of their thesis. He wants to show that by rescuing his master, Zeno fulfills the role of the perfect disciple, not to try to equal the master, not to compete with him, but to contribute to the understanding of his thesis by dismissing any objections, alternatives, or misunderstandings. From this angle, the hermeneutical position of Simplicius is closer to that of Liège and the school of Alexandria. And it will be the last quote taken from Liège. In favor of his own master, Parmenides, who asserts that being is formally one, but beings appear to be many, he concludes from 40 arguments that being is one, judging it good to ally with his own master. Moreover, agreeing again with the same master who maintains that being is immobile, he establishes by 5 arguments that being is immobile. If Simplicius would not admit that Zeno's arguments were intended to establish Parmenides' thesis, he agrees that the role of a disciple consists of fighting for his master and producing arguments in his favor. Not positive arguments, because that would amount to taking the place of the master, whose thesis is self-sufficient, but arguments that avert a misunderstanding are welcome. This is the path taken by Zeno with regard to Parmenides. This is also the path that Aristotle will take later with regard to Plato. And this is ultimately the model that Simplicius himself takes up with regard to his masters, Damascus and Ammonius. And I will conclude it. Thank you.